Well, as Adele said, thank you for joining us. Just a reminder and contact information for the core team that's been developing the plan. It hasn't changed. Adele and Michelle and Elijah with the Department of Natural Resources, and then myself and Stephanie Rearhouse and Julie Malachik, who's on the line today from HDR. Today, wanted to pretty simple agenda. Wanted to brief you on the upcoming public meetings and the solicitation of input on the draft plan document that was posted yesterday. And then for your benefit, we planned on going through the draft plan document, just kind of hitting the highlights of each section, kind of leading some breadcrumbs and telling you where things are so that you may prioritize your review and get a flavor for what's in the document to help facilitate your review. And then we'll wrap up with next steps as we go forward. So first of all, the upcoming public meetings, as you recall, as we kicked off, it was about a year ago. I think it was the mid to late May last spring, we did our first set of public meetings around the state. As required by statute, that we would hold public hearings, one prior to the mitigation plan development and one prior to the completion of such a plan. The public notice has been published. The goal on the first round was really to solicit input on past flooding, the 2019 flooding event in particular, and gather input on, we had some survey questions on how familiar they were with flood mitigation strategies and programs and funding. And so this one's a little bit different in that we want to focus on facilitating the review of the plan and gathering comments on the plan document itself. But we're also going to take the opportunity as a touch point to again raise awareness of some of the resources available at the state level for flood hazard mitigation and recovery. Our format, again, is going to be open house at the 5 meetings. We are going to have a public hearing at the Lincoln meeting, similar to what we did on the first round with the hearing officer. But the open house format, we're going to staff it with these 6 stations. The first is going to be the flood insurance claims analysis, kind of a summary of what's in the plan document and the flood insurance piece. We're going to have a station on funding and recovery resources that talks about the various programs that are documented in the plan. We're going to have a live flood risk mapping that's available there for riverine flooding. It's part of the GIS tool database where you can see what people can query their communities, look at the types of resources that are in the database, that as well as the flood risks associated with those. We'll have a station on the mitigation actions in the project templates that are in the plan. We're going to have a live demo available showing the resources that are available at the DNR website. A lot of the information and requests are from the survey results. We wanted to highlight some of that information is already available on the DNR website, and so we'll have a live station on that where people can see the various flood hazard mitigation resources from the DNR. And then we'll have a station specific to where copies of the draft plan would be available, as well as comment sheets, or we can solicit and receive comments right there at that station. So that's kind of the layout of the different stations and staffing that we'll have at the open house format of these public meetings. Regarding the meetings themselves, we're going to kick off in Lincoln from 11 to 1 with the public hearing beginning at noon, and that's going to be at the old pavilion. That evening in Kearney, we're going to be from 5 to 7 at Yanni Heritage Park. And then on Wednesday, the 27th, we're going to be in Scottsbluff, again from 11 to 1 at the Scottsbluff Public Library. And then we wrap up Thursday with 2 meetings. From 11 to 1, we're going to be at the Norfolk Public Library. And then from 5 to 7 in the evening on Thursday, we're going to be at the Fremont City Auditorium. So the first meeting in Lincoln is where we'll have the official public hearing and the open house stations. The remaining 4 meetings will all be open house format. And as a reminder, the draft plan was made available yesterday on the website, and notices were sent out. We're going to receive comments from the public as well as all of you until May 11th, so a 30-day comment period on the draft plan document. We'll collect those comments, triage, consider potential plan revisions, and our goal is to have a finalized draft by June 1st of 2022. And we're going to submit that to the legislature as well as to FEMA for approval at that time. Any questions on the, before we move into the plan document, on the public meeting format, schedule, locations? Okay. Well, I will move on then to kind of an overview of the plan document. As I said, you should have gotten an email or a notice from Adele that it had been posted on the project website. At the conclusion of today's meeting, we'll put in the chat link, the link to the document itself for those that may have not received the email directly. So the plan document, overall, it's maybe a couple hundred pages in length. It's kind of laid out, and that includes the appendices, so we tried to keep it fairly concise. So there's the intro, and I'll go through each one of these sections and what they contain, again, to kind of give you a roadmap, and for those of you that may have specific interests in particular areas, hopefully point out where you can find that. But there's 6 sections to the plan itself, and 3 appendices. And I would note that this is the plan document. There are 2 other documents that are kind of companion documents that we're preparing as well that are built off of this. One of them is a legislative summary, so it's kind of a Cliff's Notes version for the state senators that kind of summarizes all of this, and then that'll be submitted in June with the entire draft plan, but it gives them kind of a condensed version of it with references to the plan document. The second piece is kind of an expansion of this Appendix A, and it's really a summary of the stakeholder engagement and the processes, the materials, and all, and that gets pretty voluminous pretty quick when you think about the public meetings, all of our stakeholder meetings, by the time you put in the meeting materials and notes. And so that's going to, we're having that as kind of a standalone document that's going to be the documentation of the public engagement and stakeholder engagement process. So with that, we'll jump into the plan document itself. So in the first section is really the introduction, and it really is kind of just the background, purpose, and objectives, the statutory requirements and compliance, and the authorities for conducting the plan. And in there, you'll find this table. And this was, again, kind of it was useful for us as well as useful for, you know, the legislation. The legislature is looking at what were stated in the statutory language, and then specifically where it was located in the plan. So in that Section 1, you'll find, this is a condensed table, you'll find a little more description on how it was addressed and where it was addressed in the plan. But this table was kind of a scorekeeping to make sure that we had met the statutory requirements that were laid out for DNR to meet through this planning effort. Let's see, moving on, then Section 2 is the review of the plan history and development. Again, an overview of the planning process, the coordination with the other agencies, and the integration with other planning efforts that are ongoing. So That's more about the process that was undertaken and how we accomplished what we set out to do. Moving on to section 3 is really where we got into the risk assessment. And in that, we talk about the flood hazard overview and description of those. We talk about the flood hazard types, things like dam breach, levee failure, riverine flooding. There's a pretty extensive flooding history, and I know a lot of you have provided a lot of input into that portion of the flooding history in Nebraska. And then there's the flood risk assessment. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the flood insurance claims analysis. In the flood risk assessment, there are really 2 sources of information that you'll find in the plan. And we talked about this a little bit in February, in that one was the information from FEMA's national database of flood occurrence, from data since 1950, and it's their national risk index. And so it's a national database that they use to calculate an annualized frequency of riverine flooding and risk. And it talks about structures and population and agriculture, and it gives you expected annual losses, as well as kind of a qualitative flood risk rating. So you'll find a section that's dedicated to the information from the National Risk Index, and then you'll find the risk-based assessment, the tool that is being developed to kind of as a complement to this project, using specific data sets that have been provided by many of you and are the public data sets available that are Nebraska specific. And it's a part of a tool that we're developing. And it relies on these databases that are specific to Nebraska. They're compiled from federal, state, and local agencies, a lot of the local hazard mitigation plans, a lot of information from DAS, from the Department of Roads, and there's a catalog of the data sets that were used. And we looked at 3 potential hazards that were evaluated. We looked at riverine flooding. We looked at the areas protected by levees using a FEMA database for that. And then we looked at the potential hazards of dam breach. So we've got kind of those 3 levels of hazards that were looked at using the GIS tool. And then for looking at what the potential impacts or what's at risk from those exposures, we looked at the total risk exposure in the floodplain using the statewide partial database. We looked at critical facilities that were at risk. We looked at roadways and bridges, both state and local. We looked at railroads. We looked at electric transmission lines. We looked at ag lands. We looked at T&E species ranges. We looked at wetlands, and we looked at cultural and historic properties. And so we summarized those results in the plan document itself. You'll see for each one of these categories figures like this that have this one, for example, is the number of structures that are located. So it's kind of a heat map statewide, and then you'll see the top 10 counties for each, and that's going to be in the main body of the document. And then in the appendices, when we get to that, I'll show you we have a county-by-county summary of that risk assessment. A couple things to note is the maps, you'll see these counties that have this hatching are the same throughout. And those are where there's no special flood hazard area, digital mapping available. So anyway, that's just kind of a preview of the categories and what the information in the main document is. And when we get to the appendices, I'll describe in more detail and have an illustration of the table-by-table summary. In section 4, we talk about the mitigation strategies and what the state's mission goals and objectives. It's got the mitigation actions by category. It's got a prioritization and the monitoring and documentation that is part of that. It's got a repetitive loss strategy included. And then it's got a summary of previous and ongoing mitigation activities statewide. And a couple things, it's got the goals and objectives. This is directly from the plan, the 4 goals and the supporting objectives to support that for the 2022 plan. And then as you recall that we reviewed in detail, you'll see a table of all the mitigation action items categorized to align with FEMA's mitigation action categories, namely the structure and infrastructure, the natural system protection, the education and awareness program, and the local plans and regulations. And so there's all of the supporting action items that are part of that effort are included in Chapter 4. In Chapter 5 is the recovery and funding resources. And this is a section that I think you first commented on and was available last fall. And we received a lot of good input on that and have implemented, to my knowledge, we've fully implemented those, but I would certainly request those of you who have programs for funding, not only recovery, but mitigation, to please give this a look and make sure we've accurately reflected those comments and we've accurately represented the ongoing programs of each of your agencies. We've gone through the federal agencies and programs and who administers them locally. We've gone through the state agencies and programs, and then we've identified other funding program sources that maybe don't fall concisely within strictly state or strictly federal. So I do encourage you to take a look at that and please provide feedback on your specific area and agency funding if we've misrepresented that. And then the final chapter is really looking at the capability and the challenges of Nebraska's flood hazard mitigation programs. This is one of the last sections, I believe, that you had reviewed, where we looked at state capabilities, and looking at the authorities and policies and programs of state agencies. We looked at the federal capability and summarized the programs of the federal agencies that are primarily engaged in flood hazard mitigation. And then we've looked at the local capability and looked at the programs and policies and capabilities of the local communities in Nebraska. And then we also stated some of the challenges faced by the flood hazard mitigation programs in the state. And a lot of that was based on the survey that you all responded to, that we went into detail in February, the results of, on some of the challenges faced by you and others as they implement flood hazard mitigation programs. So a lot of that information is documented and described within this section 6. There's also included in section 6 the kind of the lessons learned and as well as the evaluation of kind of the regulatory framework within Nebraska. And that's just kind of a comparison of how Nebraska's program compares nationally with similar efforts by other states throughout the country. And then finally, in section 6 is the plan maintenance process of how the plan is going to be maintained going forward. So that's kind of the 6 main chapters of the document that you'll see in there, in kind of the contents of each. There are 3 additional appendices at the end to support the document. The first one is really what's good, that separate document I talked about that had the full engagement process. Well, this is the summary of the stakeholders engaged, more of a participant list where all of the actual engagement and the materials and the process will be described in more detail in that standalone document to manage document size. But in Appendix A has the summary of the stakeholders, including all of you that have been engaged in the planning process. Appendix B, as I said, really has the risk assessment information. And so that has the information from the FEMA, the National Risk Index, risk assessment information. It also has the results from the flood insurance claims analysis That's a section of the report that you reviewed and have seen those results, but this has the comprehensive information on the flood insurance claims analysis. And then it has from the GIS-based tool analysis, I'll show a couple figures that of the county by county results of that. First of all, in that Appendix B, this is there's a table that's probably twice as long as this. This is a screen capture, but again, it shows kind of the source of the data that we use not only for the flood hazards, but actually those structures, facilities at risk to those flood hazards. So this is a summary of kind of the database that was used to build the GIS tool, the source and the date that it was acquired. And then this is the summary table, and again, I've just done a clip from the plan to try and fit it in. But this is the information that you'll find. There's 3 sets of tables like this, one for the riverine flooding, one for areas protected by levees, and one for the dam breach inundation risk. So you'll see the same format of the tables for 3 different flooding hazards. And just to kind of walk through that, you'll kind of see the categorizations of these, you know, the natural and cultural assets, which include wetlands and the T&E species range and the cultural resources. You'll see population, the vulnerable populations, and I should point out these footnotes right here. You'll see each one of these categories kind of footnoted. At the bottom of the table, you'll see the footnotes that describes what exactly is accounted for that. Like, for example, vulnerable populations are like schools and assisted living facilities. And then you've got, you know, this is just the structures from the parcel database that are either state-owned or other. You've got the emergency management. These are like shelters and things like that. Emergency response is like police and fire stations. You've got the dams and levees that are within the flood hazard area. We've got the state and local roadway miles that lie within the hazard area, as well as the bridges and culverts and local drainage structures. We've also got the railroads miles and electric transmission lines. And then we've got an other category, and that includes, that came out of some of the flood hazard mitigation. It includes there was a lot of recreation areas that were identified, and so that it didn't fall neatly into the categories we had as part of the critical infrastructure, and so you'll see an other count as part of that. And then finally, you'll see this total value of improvements at risk, and that's from the statewide parcel database, and that's strictly for each parcel, the value of the improvements that lie within the flood hazard area, and you'll see that as a summary by county. The only other thing I would note is these counties over here, as I showed on the map where there wasn't a defined flood hazard area, digital flood hazard area that were cross-hatched on the map, those are the ones that they're denoted by this column 21, or this footnote 21, and so you'll see for the majority of those, there's no data. You will see a few of the counties do have some information, and that's primarily due to a small portion of an adjacent county's flood hazard area, just based on topography, extends a little bit into that county, and there were some information and some facilities at risk due to that. So that's why, even though the county has not been officially mapped or doesn't have digital flood hazard areas available, an adjacent county has a small overlap. So you'll see a note on that on some of these counties that are footnoted with 21. So that's, and this was just illustrated at the bottom of the table then is, you know, each one of these footnotes that are in the table, so you can get a flavor, and hopefully we'll understand where the data came from and what it's representing. And certainly if there's any questions as you go through that, that would be a great comment to receive, so that we can provide some clarity on that. And then finally, in Appendix C are the, and these also were provided to you in February for comment, is the project page templates of the mitigation actions, again, with the intent, to be very functional, useful, kind of a recipe or easy access to extract and place directly into the local hazard mitigation plan documents, with descriptions and considerations, photos on some of them, and certainly where additional information is available and examples where this has been implemented. So that's all in the Appendix C.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
We've got a question from John Gassman with NEMA regarding the Appendix C risk assessment data tables. He's wondering if there's anything that can be done to help complete the data. I understand you'd explained earlier that these counties are ones where largely it's paper maps describing the risk.
Yeah. So the two data sources for flood risk on these for the riverine source were taken from the FEMA flood hazard area. We downloaded there. I was looking for the exact data reference on that. We used the FEMA data for flood hazard area where it was available, and then in some areas we supplemented that with the state has special flood hazard awareness areas that they've developed for some counties. So those were the two data sources that were used for this effort. Now, regarding additional data sources, if we wanted to digitize some of the mapping or incorporate some of that, we certainly could do that. When I say we don't have data, it's primarily on the risk side and not on, for example, we have the statewide parcel database. We have, the majority of these other at-risk facilities, we have the information. It's the flood risk part. So maybe that's something we can talk about offline, Adele and Katie, if that is something that would be worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a related question here from Jeff Hoffaker. So regarding the critical facilities covered in this table B6, well, and all the critical facility tables, if they see some data that is possibly missed, what would the process be to send us the information? I guess I would say send it to me in as an email. Describe what it is that you feel has been omitted, and then we'll work with you as to what format that data is available in and how you can get it to us, and we can incorporate it into the risk assessment. We do have lots of data reported by communities as to where critical facilities exist, and as John was just stating, it's the risk data that might not be present.
Right. Any other questions on the plan document or contents? Okay. Well, with that, I guess again the notice was sent out yesterday, and hopefully you all received that. It is available for comment through May 11th. That is the link to the plan document there. And again, we have the review and comment form that we've used on all the other sections as we've gone through this. So that's also accessible, similar to the other section efforts that you've done to record your comments. as you're going through this, and if something isn't clear, or and feel free to call Adele or myself, or on the risk assessment questions regarding any questions regarding the data that we have and used. We'd be glad to get on the phone with you as well and provide clarity on that. Well, if there's no questions on the plan at this time, I'll go ahead. Again, kind of the next steps in the process. As I said, the plan's available for comment. It will be available through May 11th, April 26th through 28th. We've got these series of public meetings. If you can make them, we'd love to have you there, and certainly encourage you to spread the word to your compadres and constituents to attend. And then, as we said, on May 11th, what the process after we get the comments and the public input during the hearing and public meetings is we're going to do a triage of the comments. We'll compile them, we will review them, and consider any potential revisions to the plan. And then we want to have a final draft plan document that will be submitted to the legislature and FEMA simultaneously. And we'd like to do that June 1st. So that's kind of where we're working back from that June 1st date. We've got 2 or 3 weeks to kind of address any comments we receive after this 30-day comment period on the plan document. And regarding this group, this could be our last meeting. We put in here a meeting 7. We haven't scheduled that, but certainly if we receive substantive input or some things that require substantive changes to the plan content or format or direction through the public engagement process, through feedback from FEMA or the legislature, or through your comments, we will schedule another meeting to review any of those with you, to review any changes to that draft plan that's been published. So we'll certainly be in touch on that. We'll probably have a pretty good idea of that by mid-May when we receive the comments and have ran through the public meetings. And that's all the information that I had for today. Certainly, if anyone has questions, and for some reason I don't have maybe I can open this up. Yeah, and the link has been posted in the chat box. But if anyone has any questions on the plan document or path forward or elements of that, certainly would entertain those at this point. If there are no questions at this point, I guess I would personally like to thank you all for your participation in this effort. It couldn't have been done without you, and I know it's a commitment for a year-long planning process, but certainly appreciate your input, your thoughtful review and comments as we've throughout the development of this plan. So. Adele or Katie, did you have any closing thoughts or comments?
John, we do have another question from Tara over in Hastings, correct? She says, the draft says a few local communities have implemented zoning restrictions that restrict development in dam breach inundation areas. Can you elaborate on who these communities are? We would have to get that information from our dam safety division. I don't know which communities those are off the top of my head, but we can certainly get you that information. Is there anything you'd like to add,
Yeah,
Tara?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think there's I was trying to think of I know a couple different communities have done zoning overlays or have looked at them. And one of them that I know is ongoing, I don't think they're there yet, is in Saunders County. I know they are looking at, there's a watershed, the Lower Platte North NRD, and maybe if someone from the Lower Platte North is on, they can certainly talk in more detail than I can. But I know that they've got a watershed WFPO project through the NRCS, where there's a variety of flood control, flood retention structures that are being considered. And as part of that, they're looking at the breach inundation area downstream and looking at a zoning overlay, again, so that they're designing the structures to a certain hazard classification. And in order to maintain that hazard classification, there's some assurances that there won't be development or, you know, potential elements or facilities at risk constructed in the future that may impact that hazard classification. So I know for a fact in that project, they were looking at that process and working with the county for some zoning overlays.
Thanks, John. That's great information. Any other questions from the group about the process or content? Well, just like John, I'm very grateful for your participation over the last year, and for letting me fill your inboxes multiple times a month. And so we'll have further announcements about the project, keeping you all abreast of the final plan submission, and of course the public meetings coming up. I'll be doing a notification about those. Again, just a reminder of the dates, locations, and times. But beyond that, nothing further from me. Again, feel free to, well, please submit your comments directly to me via email. Please use that spreadsheet comment form that's available on the website. I've left the link in the chat. The plan and the comment form are available for download from the upper right-hand corner of the website. And yeah, that's all from me. Katie, do you have any words?
No, I echo what you guys have said. Thank you for everyone's participation. And I do want to encourage you all to go and look at the plan. Many of the things in the plan, you guys are the experts. And so we need you to vet that stuff and make sure that it's correct for us. We've done the best that we can based on the information we had, but there's several things in there that are specific to your programs. And so if you can just do a real good review of that stuff for us, I'd be really appreciated. And thanks again for all your time over the last year. So.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.